The coffee cup exploded against the partition like a grenade. 16 ounces of Colombian dark roast, painting the reinforced glass in brown streaks that would stain more than just leather. Victoria Sterling watched the liquid drip down the barrier, separating her from her driver. And in that moment of caffeine-fueled fury, she had no idea she had just humiliated a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient. The man behind the wheel, David Chen, according to the employment file she had never bothered to read, didn't flinch. His shoulders went rigid with the kind of controlled stillness that most people never learned. But his hands remained steady. On the Mercedes steering wheel, when he spoke, his voice carried the measured calm of someone who had been trained to remain composed under fire. "Yes, ma'am. I'll find another route." Victoria slumped back into the leather seat, suddenly aware of the chaos she had created in the pristine interior of her company car. Coffee was everywhere, pooling in the cup holders, soaking into seats that cost more than most people's monthly salary, filling the confined space with the bitter smell of her own loss of control. She had just thrown coffee at another human being. But Victoria Sterling, CEO of Cascade Pharmaceuticals and one of the most powerful women in biotech, didn't have time for shame. Not today. Not with the FDA meeting that would determine whether her company's revolutionary Alzheimer's drug moved forward or died in regulatory purgatory. Not with $200 million in funding hanging on a presentation that had to be perfect. Through the coffee-stained partition, she watched her driver navigate Seattle's gridlocked streets with the kind of precision that spoke to training most civilians never received. Something about his movements nagged at her. The way he checked mirrors, the economy of motion, the unconscious military bearing that didn't match his humble position. Victoria pushed the thought aside. David Chen was a driver. Nothing more, nothing less. The uniform hanging in his apartment closet, the medals gathering dust in a forgotten drawer, the bronze star and purple heart that told a story of courage under fire, she knew none of it. She had no idea that the quiet man she paid to navigate traffic was a decorated war hero working overnight shifts to pay for his 7-year-old daughter's leukemia treatments. She had no idea that tomorrow morning General Patricia Morrison would arrive at her company headquarters for what Victoria believed was a routine corporate security consultation. She had no idea that General Morrison had personally recommended David Chen for the highest honor his country could bestow, or that she made it a point to check on the soldiers who had served under her command, especially those who had sacrificed everything for their fellow warriors. Most importantly, Victoria Sterling had no idea that her moment of corporate rage had just set in motion a confrontation that would force her to confront the difference between power and leadership, between success and worth, between the person she had become and the person she could still choose to be. The rain hammered Seattle's downtown core like artillery fire, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and frustration. Traffic crawled through the financial district at 7:30 in the morning. A procession of expensive cars carrying expensive people to expensive problems they believed only they could solve. But in the back seat of a pristine black Mercedes S-Class, now stained with spilled coffee and regret, sat a woman who was about to learn that some lessons can't be bought, some respect can't be commanded, and some heroes hide in the most unexpected places. 24 hours from now, Victoria Sterling would stand at attention as a United States Army general saluted the man she had humiliated. 24 hours from now, she would understand that true leadership had nothing to do with corner offices and everything to do with how you treated the people who served you. But right now, as the Mercedes pulled into a tight U-turn and headed toward an alternative route, Victoria Sterling sat surrounded by the evidence of her own failure and had no idea that her entire world was about to change. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The coffee continued to drip down the partition, each drop marking time, until the moment when David Chen would reveal who he really was, and Victoria Sterling would be forced to confront who she had become. Victoria Sterling's presentation lasted exactly 47 minutes, and went better than she had any right to expect. The clinical data was problematic, yes, but her team had worked miracles with the statistical analysis, finding angles and interpretations that painted the side effect profile in the most favorable possible light. The investors had asked hard questions, they always did, but Victoria had answered each one with the kind of confident precision that had made her reputation. By the time she walked out of the conference room, Cascade Pharmaceuticals had secured another $200 million in funding, enough to carry the Alzheimer's drug through final trials and into market. It should have felt like victory. Instead, as Victoria sat in her corner office, 32 floors above the Seattle streets, she found herself thinking about coffee dripping down a partition and the rigid set of her driver's shoulders. She had won the morning, but the victory felt hollow in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the Mercedes parked in its designated spot in the executive garage, pristine and waiting. David would be somewhere in the building, probably in the driver's lounge, reading or checking his phone with the same quiet patience he brought to everything else. Victoria had built her career on reading people, on understanding what motivated them and how to leverage those motivations to her advantage. But David Chen remained an enigma, a blank space in her otherwise comprehensive understanding of the human ecosystem that surrounded her success. She pulled up his employment file on her computer, something she realized she had never bothered to do in the 3 months since Sterling Executive Services had assigned him to her account. The basic information was sparse. David Chen, age 34, Washington State driver's license, clean background check, references from 2 previous employers that checked out but revealed nothing meaningful. No college listed. No certifications beyond the standard commercial driving requirements. No emergency contacts except for a pediatric oncology unit at Seattle Children's Hospital, which struck Victoria as odd until she realized it probably meant he had a sick child. That detail stuck with her longer than it should have. She tried to push it aside, to focus on the afternoon schedule of meetings and calls, but it lingered like an itch she couldn't quite scratch. A sick child explained a lot. The quiet desperation of someone who needed steady work, who couldn't afford to lose a good job over a boss's bad morning. The guilt that Victoria had been suppressing all day finally broke through her defenses. She had thrown coffee at a man who was dealing with a sick child. A man who had done nothing wrong, except fail to magically transform Seattle's traffic into something manageable. She reached for her phone, then hesitated. An apology would acknowledge wrongdoing, and acknowledging wrongdoing was not something Victoria Sterling did lightly. Her entire leadership philosophy was built on the principle that showing weakness invited attack, that admitting mistakes was the first step toward losing control. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that quarterly earnings and FDA approvals never could. Before she could overthink it further, Victoria pressed the intercom button that connected her directly to the garage. "David, could you come to my office, please?" "Of course, ma'am. I'll be right up." His voice betrayed nothing, no surprise, no apprehension. Just the same professional courtesy he had maintained even with coffee running down the partition between them. Victoria found herself wondering what it took to develop that kind of composure, what experiences had taught David Chen to remain calm under pressure. The knock on her door came exactly 4 minutes later. Soft, but confident. "Come in," Victoria called, and David stepped into her office with the same measured precision he brought to his driving. Up close, away from the confined space of the Mercedes, Victoria noticed details she had missed before. The way he carried himself with an unconscious military bearing that spoke to training most civilians never received. The small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested experiences beyond the typical driver's resume. The way his eyes automatically catalogued the room's exits and sight lines before focusing on her with complete attention. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Victoria gestured to one of the chairs facing her desk. But David remained standing. Another tell. She realized the stance of someone accustomed to receiving orders while on his feet. "I owe you an apology," she said, the words coming out more abruptly than she had intended. "This morning? In the car. That was unacceptable. You were doing your job, and I took out my frustration on you. I'm sorry." David's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A slight relaxation, perhaps, or maybe just surprise at hearing an apology from someone who probably didn't offer them often. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. I noticed in your file that you have an emergency contact at Children's Hospital," Victoria continued, venturing into territory she normally would have avoided. "I hope everything is okay." For the first time since entering her office, David's professional mask slipped just slightly. Victoria saw something flicker across his face. Pain, worry, love, and fierce protectiveness all compressed into a single moment of unguarded emotion. "My daughter," he said simply. "She's 7. She's been fighting leukemia for the past year." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She thought about her morning tantrum, about coffee hurled in anger at a man who was watching his child battle cancer. The shame that followed was sharp and immediate, cutting through her usual defenses like a blade. "I had no idea," she said, and immediately realized how hollow that sounded. Of course, she had no idea. She had never bothered to learn anything about the man who drove her through the city every day, who knew her schedule better than her own assistant, who had been nothing but reliable and professional for 3 months. "There's no reason you would, ma'am. I keep my personal life separate from work." Something in the way he said it suggested this was more than just professional discretion. Victoria found herself studying David's face, looking for clues to the story behind the careful neutrality. "How is she doing?" "Your daughter?" David was quiet for a moment, and Victoria could see him deciding how much to reveal, weighing the risks of honesty against the benefits of maintaining distance. "She's starting a new treatment protocol next week. The doctors are optimistic." "But," he shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both hope and resignation. "That must be terrifying." "Yes, ma'am, it is." The simple honesty of his response hit Victoria harder than any amount of dramatic detail might have. She thought about her own fears. Market volatility, FDA rejections, hostile takeovers, and realized how small they seemed compared to watching your child fight for her life. "If you need time off for appointments or treatments, you should have said something. We can adjust your schedule." "I appreciate that, ma'am, but I need the work. The insurance helps, but there are always expenses that aren't covered. Parking, meals, time off for recovery. It adds up quickly." Victoria nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. The morning's traffic delay wasn't just an inconvenience for David. It was lost income, time he couldn't afford to waste when every hour of work helped pay for his daughter's treatment. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. "What's her name?" Victoria asked. "Emma?" David's voice softened when he said it, and for just a moment, Victoria glimpsed the father beneath the professional driver. "She wants to be a doctor when she grows up, says she's going to find a cure for cancer, so other kids don't have to go through what she's going through." The words hung in the air between them, and Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. She thought about her own childhood dreams, about the idealism that had driven her into pharmaceutical development in the first place. Somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of the human faces behind the clinical trials and market projections. That's beautiful," she said, and meant it. David nodded, then seemed to remember where he was and who he was talking to. The professional mask slipped back into place, the momentary vulnerability disappearing behind practiced composure. "Was there anything else you needed, ma'am?" Victoria wanted to say more. Wanted to ask about Emma's treatment, about David's plans, about the story behind the military bearing and the careful control. But she could see him withdrawing, could sense the boundaries being rebuilt. "No, that's all. Thank you for being understanding about this morning." David nodded once and turned to leave, but stopped when Victoria called his name. "David, tomorrow morning we're having a corporate security consultation. A General Morrison will be arriving at 9. I'd appreciate it if you could be here to handle any transportation needs." Something changed in David's expression. A flicker of recognition so brief, Victoria almost missed it. But his voice remained neutral when he responded, "Of course, ma'am. I'll be here at 8:30 to prepare." After he left, Victoria sat in her office, staring out at the Seattle skyline and trying to process what she had learned. David Chen wasn't just a driver. He was a father, fighting to save his daughter's life, working multiple jobs, and sacrificing his own comfort to pay for treatments that might or might not work. She thought about the coffee again, about the casual cruelty of her morning outburst, and felt ashamed in a way that had nothing to do with corporate image or professional reputation. She had treated another human being badly, had let her own stress and pressure become an excuse for behavior she wouldn't tolerate from anyone else. Victoria pulled up the Sterling Executive Services contract on her computer and began making notes. David's salary could be increased retroactively, framed as a performance bonus that wouldn't raise questions. The company's health insurance plan included provisions for family coverage that might help with Emma's treatments. Small gestures, perhaps, but genuine ones, a start toward making amends for behavior that couldn't be undone, but could, perhaps, be balanced by something better going forward. As she worked, Victoria found herself thinking about General Morrison's visit tomorrow. Corporate security consultations were routine, but something about David's reaction to the name suggested there might be more to the story than she understood. She made a mental note to review the general's background before the meeting, then turned her attention back to the salary adjustment paperwork. It was past 6 o'clock when she finally finished, and the executive garage was mostly empty, except for her Mercedes and a few other cars belonging to the night security staff. David was waiting by the car when she arrived. Professional as always, but Victoria thought she detected something different in his demeanor. Not warmer, exactly, but less guarded. The apology had mattered, even if he wouldn't say so directly. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. The silence felt less like distance and more like the beginning of understanding. Victoria found herself noticing things she had missed before, the way David checked his mirrors with military precision. The economy of movement that suggested training beyond civilian driving schools, the small photo tucked into the sun visor that showed a young girl with bright eyes and a hospital bracelet. That had to be Emma. "David," Victoria said as they pulled into her driveway in the Queen Anne district. "Thank you for today, for your patience with me, and for sharing about Emma. I know that wasn't easy." Through the rearview mirror, she saw him nod once. "Thank you for listening, ma'am. Not everyone would have." The words carried weight that went beyond their surface meaning, and Victoria found herself wondering what other stories David carried, What other experiences had taught him not to expect understanding from the people who employed him? She gathered her briefcase and laptop bag, then paused with her hand on the door handle. I meant what I said about adjusting your schedule if you need time for Emma's treatments. Family comes first. I appreciate that, ma'am. More than you know. Victoria stepped out of the car and watched David drive away, the taillights disappearing into the Seattle evening. She stood in her driveway for a long moment, thinking about sick children and financial pressure and the casual indifference with which she had treated a man who was fighting battles she had never imagined. Tomorrow would bring General Morrison, and whatever revelations that meeting might hold. But tonight, Victoria Sterling went to bed thinking about Emma Chen, a 7-year-old girl who wanted to cure cancer, and wondering when she had stopped seeing the human faces behind her corporate empire. Across the city, in a small apartment near the VA Medical Center, David Chen sat beside his daughter's bed, reading from a book about brave princesses and impossible quests. Emma's hair had grown back in patches since the last round of chemotherapy, and she wore a knitted cap that one of the hospital volunteers had made for her. "Daddy," she said as he finished the chapter, "do you think I'll get to meet any famous people when I'm a doctor?" David thought about Victoria Sterling's apology, about the surprise in her voice when she learned about Emma's illness, about the meeting. Tomorrow that would change everything between them. "I think," he said carefully, "that you're going to meet all kinds of interesting people as you grow up. Some of them might surprise you." Emma smiled and settled deeper into her pillows, content with that answer in the way only children could be. David kissed her forehead and dimmed the lights, but he didn't leave immediately. He sat in the chair beside her bed and thought about the Medal of Honor in his dresser drawer, about the commendations and certificates that Emma had never seen, because he had learned that civilian employers didn't always know how to process military service. He thought about General Morrison, who had saved his career after Afghanistan, who had personally recommended him for the highest honor his country could bestow, who had kept in touch even after his medical discharge and transition to civilian life. And he thought about Victoria Sterling, who had thrown coffee at him in anger, and then apologized with genuine remorse, who had asked about Emma not because she had to, but because she had realized, perhaps for the first time, that her driver was a human being with his own struggles and fears. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tomorrow, Victoria Sterling would learn that respect and dignity weren't luxuries to be dispensed at will. They were fundamental requirements of leadership, and their absence had consequences that extended far beyond corporate hierarchies. But tonight, David was simply a father, sitting beside his sleeping daughter, grateful for steady work and good insurance, and the possibility that tomorrow might bring a new understanding between two people who had spent 3 months in the same car without really seeing each other at all. Outside, Seattle slept under a blanket of low clouds and drizzling rain, unaware that morning would bring one of those rare moments when the universe arranges itself to deliver exactly the lesson someone needs to learn. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. David checked Emma's breathing one more time, adjusted her blankets, and went to prepare his uniform for the morning. General Morrison wouldn't expect anything less than his best. And after 3 months of civilian clothes and careful invisibility, it would feel good to stand at attention again. Some identities, David had learned, were too important to stay hidden forever. Victoria arrived at the office 45 minutes early the next morning, which was unusual even for her. She told herself it was because of the Morrison meeting, but the truth was more complicated. She had slept poorly, haunted by images of coffee dripping down glass, and a 7-year-old girl in a hospital bed who wanted to cure cancer. The executive garage was empty, except for David's Honda Civic, a 12-year-old sedan that spoke to careful budgeting and practical priorities and the overnight security guard's pickup truck. Victoria sat in her office with a cup of coffee she couldn't quite bring herself to drink, watching the clock and trying to understand why she felt so nervous about a routine corporate consultation. At 8:30 sharp, the elevator dinged, and Victoria looked up to see David stepping into the garage. But something was wrong with the picture, something that made her brain stutter and recalibrate. David Chen was wearing a military dress uniform. Not just any uniform, but the deep blue service dress of the United States Army, complete with ribbons and decorations that caught the fluorescent light like small jewels. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected, that for a moment Victoria wondered if she was looking at the same person who had been driving her car for 3 months. This wasn't the quiet, unassuming man in civilian clothes who kept his head down and his voice respectful. This was a soldier, standing at attention with the kind of bearing that spoke to years of training and service and experiences that most people would never understand. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, calling down to the garage without fully understanding why. "David? Could you come to my office before General Morrison arrives?" "Yes, ma'am. On my way." The elevator ride seemed to take forever. When David knocked on her door, Victoria felt her mouth go dry. She had thought she was beginning to understand him after yesterday's conversation, but clearly she had only scratched the surface. "Come in." David entered her office and came to attention automatically, his posture perfect, his gaze fixed at a point just over her left shoulder. In the morning light streaming through her windows, Victoria could see the details she had missed in the garage: the combat infantry badge, the bronze star, the Purple Heart, and prominently displayed over his left pocket, a ribbon that made her breath catch in her throat. The Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration that the United States could bestow, awarded for conspicuous gallantry at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Victoria stared at the ribbon, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. David Chen, her driver, the man she had thrown coffee at yesterday morning, was a Medal of Honor recipient, a genuine American hero, working overnight shifts to pay for his daughter's cancer treatments while she berated him for traffic delays he couldn't control. She started, then stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Master Sergeant David Chen, United States Army Special Forces retired," David said formally. "Medal of Honor recipient, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, and Congressional Medal of Honor for actions in Afghanistan, 2019. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt the room spin slightly around her, the weight of her own ignorance and casual cruelty. She thought about every interaction they had shared, every dismissive comment, every moment when she had treated him as invisible help rather than a human being. And yesterday morning, dear God, yesterday morning, "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. David's expression softened just slightly. "Would it have mattered, ma'am? Before yesterday?" The question hit her like a physical blow, because she knew the answer. No, it wouldn't have mattered. 3 months ago, even 3 days ago, Victoria Sterling would have seen David's military service as an interesting footnote, perhaps worth mentioning at dinner parties, but fundamentally irrelevant to his ability to navigate Seattle traffic. The shame that washed over her was overwhelming and complete. "What did you do? What did you do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "To earn the Medal of Honor?" David hesitated, and Victoria could see the memories flickering behind his eyes, shadows of experiences that belonged to a different world than corporate boardrooms and pharmaceutical presentations. "There was an ambush," he said finally. "My unit was pinned down, taking heavy casualties. 12 men wounded, no way to reach the extraction point. I volunteered to stay behind and hold the position while the wounded were evacuated. He paused, and Victoria realized he was giving her the sanitized version, the one that left out the details too brutal for civilian understanding. I held that position for 4 hours against overwhelming enemy fire. Used everything I had. My rifle, grenades, eventually just my sidearm, and whatever ammunition I could scavenge from the fallen. When the rescue team finally reached me, I had taken 3 bullets and saved the lives of 11 soldiers who went home to their families. The words landed in Victoria's office, like stones dropped in still water, creating ripples that seemed to change everything about the space around them. She thought about her own definition of courage, about the boardroom battles and hostile negotiations she had considered heroic, and realized how small they seemed compared to what David had endured. "You could have died," she said. "Yes, ma'am. That was always a possibility. And you have a daughter who needs you." David's composure cracked just slightly at that. Emma wasn't born yet, but yes. Thinking about her now, it makes what I did seem both more and less important. Before Victoria could respond, her intercom buzzed. "Miss Sterling, General Morrison is here for the security consultation." Victoria felt her stomach drop. She looked at David, at the uniform and decorations that told a story of service and sacrifice, and suddenly understood that this meeting was not what she had thought it would be. "Send her up," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. David straightened to attention. "Ma'am, General Morrison was my commanding officer in Afghanistan. She's the one who recommended me for the Medal of Honor." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a corporate security consultation. This was something else entirely. Something David had arranged as a response to yesterday morning's incident. Victoria felt a cold dread settle in her chest as she realized she was about to be confronted by a United States Army general who had personal knowledge of the man Victoria had humiliated. The knock on the door came precisely at 9 a.m. "Come in." General Patricia Morrison entered Victoria's office with the kind of presence that seemed to expand the space around her. She was in her early 50s. Silver-haired and steel-eyed, wearing a dress blue uniform that spoke to 3 decades of military service, and the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Behind her came an aide, a young lieutenant who positioned himself near the door and came to attention. But it was the general's focus that mattered, the way her gaze swept the room and landed on David with unmistakable recognition and respect. "Master Sergeant Chen," she said, her voice carrying warmth that transformed her entire bearing. "It's good to see you." David saluted with parade ground precision, and the general returned it with equal formality before stepping forward to shake his hand. "General Morrison," David said. The casual question, asked with genuine concern, made Victoria's chest tighten. This wasn't just a professional relationship. This was a commanding officer who cared about her soldiers, who remembered their families and their struggles years after they had left her command. "Starting a new treatment protocol next week, ma'am. The doctors are optimistic." General Morrison nodded, then turned to face Victoria with the kind of attention that made her feel like she was being evaluated at a molecular level. "Miss Sterling, I believe you've been working with Master Sergeant Chen for some time now." It wasn't a question, and Victoria sensed the trap that was being laid with military precision. She glanced at David, who stood at attention beside her desk, his face impassive, but his presence filling the room with unspoken authority. "Yes," Victoria said carefully. "David has been my driver for 3 months." "Your driver?" General Morrison repeated, her voice neutral but somehow loaded with meaning. "And how has that working relationship been?" Victoria felt sweat gather at her hairline. She could lie, could present the sanitized version that painted her in the best possible light. But something about the general's presence, about David's stillness, about the weight of the Medal of Honor ribbon that seemed to glow in her peripheral vision, made deception impossible. "Yesterday morning," Victoria said, the words coming out in a rush. "I was under pressure about an important meeting. We were stuck in traffic, and I lost my temper. I threw coffee at the partition. At David." The silence that followed was arctic. Victoria could see something shift in General Morrison's expression. A kind of cold fury that spoke to years of command, and an absolute intolerance for the mistreatment of her soldiers. "You threw coffee," the general said slowly, "at a Medal of Honor recipient. I didn't know." "You didn't know," General Morrison interrupted, her voice cutting through Victoria's protest like a blade. "You didn't know that Master Sergeant Chen received the highest honor this country can bestow for saving 11 lives under fire. You didn't know that he spent 8 months in military hospitals, recovering from wounds sustained while protecting his fellow soldiers. You didn't know that he works multiple jobs to pay for his daughter's cancer treatments." Each fact landed like a physical blow, and Victoria felt herself shrinking under the general's withering assessment. "But you did know," Morrison continued, "that he was a human being, performing a service for you. You did know that he was doing his best in difficult circumstances, and you chose to humiliate him anyway." Victoria opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came. What defense could there be? What justification could possibly excuse treating another person with such casual cruelty? "General Morrison," David said quietly, "Miss Sterling apologized yesterday. She didn't have to do that." The general's expression softened slightly as she looked at David, but when she turned back to Victoria, her gaze remained stern. "Master Sergeant Chen is a better person than most," she said. "He believes in giving people the benefit of the doubt, in second chances and the possibility of redemption. But I've seen too many good soldiers treated badly by people who think their civilian success gives them the right to abuse those they consider beneath them." Victoria felt tears threatening, a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself in years. "You're right," she said, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. I let my pressure and stress become an excuse for treating David badly, and there's no justification for that." She turned to look at David, at the uniform and decorations that told a story of service she had never bothered to learn. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time the words carried the full weight of her understanding. "Not just for yesterday morning, but for 3 months of treating you like you were invisible. You deserved better from me. You deserve better from everyone." General Morrison studied Victoria for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. The anger was still there, but it was tempered now by something that might have been approval. "The measure of a person," the general said finally, "isn't whether they make mistakes. It's what they do after they realize they've made them." She looked at David, who nodded once, and Victoria understood that some kind of test had just been passed. "Master, Sergeant Chen tells me that your daughter is receiving treatment for leukemia," Morrison continued. "Military families understand medical crises better than most. We take care of our own, and we expect our civilian partners to do the same." The implication was clear, and Victoria found herself nodding before fully understanding what she was agreeing to. "Of course, whatever David needs time off for appointments, flexibility in scheduling, additional insurance coverage, it's not a problem." "Thank you," David said quietly, "but that's not why I arranged this meeting." Victoria looked at him in confusion. "Then why?" David's expression was thoughtful, almost sad. Because I've spent 3 months watching you build walls around yourself. I thought maybe it was time for both of us to stop hiding. The words hit Victoria like a revelation. She thought about her corner office, about the distance she maintained from everyone around her, about the loneliness that had become so constant she had stopped noticing it. I don't know how, she admitted. I've spent so long focused on success and control that I've forgotten how to see people as anything other than obstacles or assets. General Morrison's expression softened for the first time since entering the office. Leadership isn't about control, Miss Sterling. It's about service. The best officers I've known understood that their job was to take care of their people, not the other way around. She gestured toward David. Master Sergeant Chen understood that. When he stayed behind to save his fellow soldiers, he understands it now, when he works multiple jobs to care for his daughter. Real leadership always starts with putting others first. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a fundamental recalibration of everything she thought she understood about power and authority and success. Thank you for teaching me that, she said to both of them. Chance to do better. General Morrison nodded once, then stepped forward to shake Victoria's hand. Take care of him, she said simply. He's one of the good ones. After the general and her aide left, Victoria and David stood alone in her office, the morning sun streaming through the windows and illuminating the space between them. I want to do right by you, Victoria said. And by Emma. Not because I have to, but because it's what I should have been doing all along. David's smile was small but genuine. Emma would like to meet you sometime, if you're interested. She's always curious about the people I work with. Victoria felt her chest tighten with emotion. I would be honored to meet her. As they stood there, Victoria realized that something fundamental had changed between them. Not just the dynamic of employer and employee, but something deeper, the beginning of genuine respect and understanding between two people who had spent months in the same space without ever really seeing each other. David, she said, as he prepared to leave, thank you for yesterday's honesty, for today's lesson, and for being patient enough to give me a chance to become someone better. David nodded once, then headed for the door, but he paused at the threshold and looked back. Everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing, he said. Even successful billionaires who throw coffee when they're scared. After he left, Victoria sat alone in her office and thought about courage, not the kind that happened in boardrooms, but the kind that happened in hospital waiting rooms and on battlefields, and in the quiet moments when you chose to see another person's humanity instead of your own convenience. She pulled up David's employment file again, but this time she wasn't looking at salary adjustments or scheduling accommodations. She was looking at the emergency contact for Seattle Children's Hospital, and she was making plans. Some transformations, Victoria realized, didn't happen overnight. But they did happen. One choice at a time. One moment of genuine connection, replacing years of careful distance. Tomorrow, she would visit Emma Chen and learn about brave princesses and impossible quests. But today, she would sit with the knowledge that sometimes the most important lessons came from the people you least expected to teach them. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those lessons came with the possibility of redemption. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.